Can art survive when logic tries to erase it? The email arrived at 6:12 a.m., its subject line stripped of emotion, precision engineered to deliver impact without sympathy. Final notice. Bankruptcy confirmation. Eliza stared at the screen long enough for the words to stop looking like language and start looking like a verdict. There was no dramatic reaction, no immediate breakdown. Just a slow, measured inhale, and then the quiet understanding that something irreversible had just happened. The Sterling atelier, her father's legacy, her inheritance, her burden, was officially dead. She didn't open the attachment right away. She already knew what it contained: legal confirmations, asset breakdowns, creditor priorities. The language of dismantling. A lifetime of craftsmanship reduced to bullet points and liquidation estimates. She closed the laptop instead and pressed her palms against the cool marble of the kitchen counter, grounding herself in something that still felt solid. The apartment was too quiet. It was the kind of silence Julian, her father's former director of operations, had predicted months ago. He had called it the inevitable cooling of a dying star, his voice oily with a sympathy that didn't reach his eyes. Now, his predictions were the only thing left in the room. She closed her eyes, and for a second, she wasn't in a cold kitchen, but under her father's cutting table at age 7. She remembered the rhythmic snip-snip of his shears and the way he would hold a button to the light like it was a diamond. "Precision is the only way we honor the body, Eliza," he had whispered. That memory was a ghost now, haunting a studio that was being appraised by men who saw buttons only as plastic units. It hadn't always been like this. There used to be fabric samples draped over chairs, sketches pinned to every available surface, late-night calls with suppliers that blurred into early-morning fittings. Now it was sterile, clean, emptied out piece by piece over the past months as bills mounted and hope thinned. Eliza pushed herself upright and moved with purpose. Hesitation was a luxury she could no longer afford. By 8 a.m., she was dressed in black, sharp lines, minimalist tailoring, a silent refusal to look defeated. Her reflection in the mirror held steady, dark circles under her eyes, but her posture remained unbroken. If the world was going to watch her lose everything, she wouldn't give it the satisfaction of seeing her crumble. The office building of Stone Capital stood in stark contrast to everything she associated with fashion. No warmth, no texture, just glass, steel, and a calculated absence of personality. As she stepped inside, the air itself felt different, cooler, controlled, as if even oxygen here had been optimized for efficiency. "Miss Sterling." The receptionist greeted, her tone polite but distant. "Mr. Stone is expecting you." Of course he was. Eliza nodded once and followed the indicated path without asking questions. She had done her research. Mark Stone, CEO, specialist in distressed assets. A man who didn't build things, he ended them, cleanly and profitably. The elevator ride to the top floor felt longer than it was. She watched the numbers climb, each one marking the final ascent before impact. By the time the doors opened, her expression had settled into something neutral, almost cold. She would meet him on equal ground, or at least give the illusion of it. His office was larger than she expected, but not extravagant. It was precise, every object placed with intention, or perhaps the absence of unnecessary objects was the intention itself. Mark Stone stood by the window when she entered, his back to her, phone pressed to his ear. "No, we don't extend timelines because of sentiment," he was saying, voice low, controlled. "We extend them when it's profitable. There's a difference." He ended the call before she could fully step inside and turned. His gaze moved over her once. Not lingering, not dismissive, assessing, calculating. Eliza felt it like a measurement rather than attention. "Miss Sterling," he said, gesturing toward the chair opposite his desk. "Thank you for coming." She didn't thank him back. Instead, she sat, placing her bag beside her chair with deliberate care. "You filed the final notice early," she said, getting straight to the point. "Why?" A flicker of something, approval, perhaps, passed through his expression. "Because delaying the inevitable increases losses," he replied. "For everyone involved." Convenient answer. Accurate answer. Silence settled between them, sharp and clean. Eliza leaned forward slightly, her fingers interlacing on the desk. "Let's skip the formalities. You're here to dismantle what's left of my company. I'm here because I want to understand exactly how you plan to do it. Mark didn't sit immediately. Instead, he circled his desk slowly before taking his place across from her. The movement wasn't theatrical. It was controlled, measured, like everything else about him. Your company, he said, is no longer yours in any meaningful financial sense. The majority of its assets are now under creditor control. My role is to maximize their recovery. And that means selling off intellectual property, liquidating inventory, terminating leases. He paused just long enough for the next part to land. Dissolving the brand. The word hung in the air longer than it should have. Eliza's jaw tightened, but she didn't look away. You make it sound simple. It is simple, he said. Not easy, but simple. For a moment, she hated him. Not in the loud, explosive way, but in something colder, sharper. He spoke about her father's life's work as if it were a line item, as if decades of artistry could be reduced to efficiency metrics. You don't understand what this brand is, she said quietly. Mark met her gaze without hesitation. I understand exactly what it is, he replied. A legacy business that failed to adapt to market conditions. Accumulated debt exceeded revenue projections. Cash flow collapsed. The outcome was predictable. That's not understanding. That's autopsy. It's the only understanding that matters now. The tension between them shifted, not louder, but heavier. Eliza straightened, her voice gaining an edge. You think because you can quantify something, you've captured its value. But you haven't. You've just translated it into numbers you're comfortable with. And you think because something has emotional significance, it should be exempt from financial reality? I think you're very good at ending things you never had to build. That landed. This time, the reaction was subtle, a slight narrowing of his eyes, but it was there. Eliza noted it, filing it away. He wasn't immune. He just hit it better than most. Mark leaned back in his chair, studying her again, but differently now. You're still thinking like an owner, he said. That's no longer your position. Then what is my position? Obsolete, he said plainly. The word hit harder than she expected. Not because it was new, but because of how easily he said it. Eliza exhaled slowly, forcing the reaction down. If that's true, she said, then why am I here? For the first time, Mark didn't answer immediately. He reached for a file on his desk, opened it, and slid a single document toward her. Because, he said, there may be a way to increase the value of what remains. Eliza didn't touch the paper right away. You mean squeeze a little more profit out before you shut everything down? I mean, he corrected, create a controlled opportunity to reposition the brand before liquidation. She looked at him sharply. Reposition? A final collection, he said. One that generates enough attention to elevate perceived value. Short-term, but effective. Eliza's pulse shifted. Faster now, not with hope, but with something close to it. And then we sell, he said. Of course, that was always the end point. She knew that. But still, the idea of one last collection, one last chance to show what the brand truly was, cut through the numbness that had settled over her since the email. You expect me to design it, she said. I expect you to execute it efficiently, he replied, within strict financial parameters. There it is. Mark didn't react to the sarcasm. If you're going to do this, he continued, it will be under my direction. Budget decisions, production timelines, resource allocation, you follow my lead. No deviations. Eliza let out a short, humorless breath. You want me to create something meaningful while treating it like a disposable asset. I want you to create something that sells. That's not the same thing. It is in this context. Silence again, but this time it was different. It wasn't just tension. It was calculation. Eliza's mind was already moving through possibilities, risks, outcomes. If she walked away now, the brand would be dismantled without resistance, everything reduced to fragments. If she agreed, you'd fund it, she asked. Yes. Fully. Within limits, he said. But enough to execute a viable collection. And I get creative control? No, he said without hesitation. You get creative input. Control remains aligned with financial strategy. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what she expected from him. You're asking me to save my own company under your rules, so you can sell it out from under me. I'm offering you the only scenario in which your company leaves the market at a higher valuation than it currently holds, he replied. Everything else ends the same way, just with less value preserved. Eliza looked down at the document, but still didn't touch it. She didn't need to read it to understand the terms. She already knew the shape of the trap. The question was whether stepping into it gave her any leverage at all. "You don't care about this brand," she said quietly. "No," Mark agreed. "You don't care about what it represents." "No, you don't care about me." A pause. This one slightly longer. "No," he said again. Strangely, that was the most honest thing he'd said since she walked in. And somehow, it made the offer clearer, cleaner. There were no illusions here. No hidden sentiment. Just terms. Consequences. Choices. Eliza finally reached for the document. Her fingers rested on the edge of the paper, but she didn't pull it closer yet. "And if I say no? Then the liquidation proceeds as scheduled," Mark said. "Without your involvement." She nodded once. That was what she expected. No negotiation there. Her gaze lifted to meet his again, and this time there was something sharper behind it. Not just resistance, but intent. "If I do this," she said, "I don't compromise on quality." "You compromise where necessary," he corrected. "No," she said firmly. "That's the line. If the collection fails, it won't be because it was diluted." Mark watched her for a long moment, as if recalibrating something internally. "Quality," he said slowly, "is only relevant if it translates into demand." "It will," she replied. "Confidence doesn't guarantee results. It guarantees I won't sabotage myself to meet your spreadsheets." Another pause. This one heavier. He was evaluating risk again, but differently now. Not just financial. Her. Finally, he leaned forward slightly. "If I agree to prioritize quality within defined limits," he said, "you adhere to every financial directive I set." "Every reasonable one." "Every one," he repeated. Eliza held his gaze, measuring him the same way he measured everything else. And then, slowly, she nodded. "Fine." The word settled between them like a contract before the contract. She pulled the document fully toward her now, eyes scanning the text quickly, efficiently. She didn't need to linger. She understood the structure well enough. When she reached the signature line, she hesitated, but only for a fraction of a second. Then she signed. The pen didn't shake. Her hand remained steady even as something fundamental shifted beneath the surface. This wasn't just agreement. This was commitment to a path that would either give her one last chance or take the final piece of control she had left. She set the pen down and slid the document back across the desk. Mark took it, glancing at the signature briefly before closing the folder. "Then we begin immediately," he said. "Of course we do," Eliza replied, standing. As she turned to leave, he spoke again. "Miss Sterling." She paused, but didn't face him fully. "What?" "This only works if you separate emotion from execution," he said. "If you can't do that, it will fail." Eliza turned her head just enough to meet his gaze over her shoulder. Her expression was calm, but her eyes weren't. "You're wrong," she said. "It only works because I won't." For the first time since she walked in, Mark didn't have an immediate response. Eliza didn't wait for one. She walked out of the office without looking back, her steps steady, her mind already shifting into motion. The brand wasn't dead. Not yet. And she had just made a deal with the man most capable of finishing it. The first directive arrived before Eliza even reached her car. A message, short and precise. Budget review. 10 a.m. No delays. No greeting. No acknowledgement of the fact that she had just signed away the last illusion of control over her own company. She stared at the screen for a second, then locked it and exhaled once. This was the reality now. Everything reduced to decisions measured in cost, efficiency, and return. By the time she walked into the temporary workspace that had replaced her former studio, the transformation was already visible. Where there had once been organized chaos, fabric rolls, sketchboards, half-finished prototypes, there was now structure. Tables cleared, labels printed, inventories digitized. It wasn't her space anymore. It was his system imposed on her world. Mark stood near a long table covered in neatly stacked reports, tablet in hand, already mid-discussion with two analysts. He didn't stop when she entered. He didn't even acknowledge her immediately. "Reduce supplier variance to 2 primary channels," he was saying. "We don't need 5 options when 2 can deliver at scale. That compromises material diversity," one of the analysts noted carefully. "It eliminates unnecessary cost," Mark replied without looking up. "Diversity is irrelevant if it doesn't translate into revenue." Eliza stepped forward. It translates into identity, she said. Now he looked at her. Not surprised. Not irritated. Just adjusting the conversation. We'll test that assumption, he said calmly. Take a seat. She didn't sit immediately. Her gaze moved over the reports, the structured layout, the absence of anything remotely creative. This wasn't a studio. It was an operating room. And her brand was the patient on the table. Meeting starts when I'm ready, she said. A subtle shift in the room. The analysts exchanged brief glances. Mark studied her for half a second longer than necessary, then nodded once. Then we're ready. That was the first boundary drawn. Not loud, not dramatic, but clear. They sat across from each other, the table between them no longer symbolic but functional, a divide of priorities. Mark tapped his tablet, and a projection lit up the screen behind him. Numbers, graphs, projections. Everything precise. Everything detached. Current financial state, he began, places the brand at minimal acquisition interest. We're operating on a narrow window to increase perceived value. I'm aware, Eliza said. Then we won't waste time on explanations. He shifted to the next slide. You'll produce a capsule collection. 12 pieces. 12. Her reaction was immediate. That's not a collection. That's a statement at best. Exactly. That's not enough to re-establish market presence. It's enough to create scarcity, Mark countered. Scarcity drives demand. Demand drives valuation. Eliza leaned back slightly, studying the numbers on the screen, then him. You're not trying to revive the brand, she said. You're trying to package it. I'm trying to position it, he corrected. Revival isn't the objective. Value is. There's a difference. Not to the buyer. Silence held for a second, not empty, but charged. Eliza's mind moved quickly, testing the framework he was forcing on her. 12 pieces. Measured output. Limited resources. It was restrictive, but not impossible. What's the timeline? She asked. 4 weeks. She almost smiled. Not out of amusement, but disbelief. You want a high-end collection in 4 weeks. I want a sellable collection in 4 weeks. That's not how this works. It is now. Their eyes locked again. This time, the tension sharpened, not just disagreement, but collision of entire philosophies. You're cutting time and resources and expecting quality to survive, she said. I'm cutting inefficiency and expecting talent to compensate, he replied. That's not how craftsmanship works. That's exactly how pressure works. Eliza exhaled slowly, forcing herself not to escalate. This wasn't about winning an argument. It was about understanding the battlefield. She shifted her focus back to the projection. Budget, she said. Mark switched slides instantly. Allocated funding is capped. You'll receive staged releases based on milestone completion. So I have to prove progress to access my own resources. You have to justify continued investment, he corrected. Her fingers tapped once against the table, controlled, measured. And if I don't meet your milestones? Funding stops. Mid-production? Yes. That guarantees failure. That guarantees accountability. Another pause. This one tighter. Eliza leaned forward now, her voice lower, but sharper. You're building a system where I can't afford a single misstep. I'm building a system where missteps are visible immediately, Mark said. There's a difference. No, she said. There isn't. For a moment, neither spoke. The analysts remained silent, watching the exchange like spectators at something they didn't fully understand but knew better than to interrupt. Eliza broke the silence first. Fabric sourcing, she said. I choose suppliers. No, Mark said immediately. You choose within approved cost brackets. I won't compromise on material quality. You'll optimize it. That's a softer word for the same thing. It's a more accurate one. She held his gaze, unmoving. If the fabric is wrong, the entire collection fails. I don't negotiate that. Mark didn't respond right away. He studied her, not dismissing, not agreeing, just recalibrating again. Finally, he spoke. Submit your top 3 supplier options, he said. We evaluate cost versus output. You get final selection within that range. Not full control, but not zero either. Eliza nodded once. Fine. The tension followed them 2 days later to a dimly lit warehouse in the garment district. Mark stood among rolls of heavy wool, his cashmere coat a stark contrast to the dust. This synthetic blend is 30% cheaper, he said, tapping a bolt of fabric. On paper, it has the same structural weight. Eliza didn't argue with words. She grabbed a pair of shears, cut a yard of his efficient blend and a yard of her Italian silk, then draped them both over a mannequin. Your blend has weight, Mark, but it has no memory, she said, pulling the fabric tight. When she let go, the synthetic clumped. The silk fell like water. If a woman moves in your version, the suit dies. If she moves in mine, it lives. Do you want to sell a shroud or a legacy? Mark looked at the two fabrics, then at the stopwatch on his wrist. For the first time, he didn't look at the cost. He looked at the fall of the silk. Order the silk, he said quietly, but find the margin somewhere else. He moved on immediately. Production team will be reduced. No. This time, the interruption was instant, sharp. Mark's eyes lifted again. Explain. I've already lost half my team, she said. The remaining ones are the only people who understand the construction techniques we use. If you cut them, we lose consistency. We reduce overhead. We lose execution. We streamline. We cripple it. The words overlapped slightly, not chaotic, but faster now, closer to friction than structured debate. Mark leaned back slightly, watching her with more focus than before. You're asking for exceptions, he said. I'm asking for reality, she replied. You can't manufacture expertise on a 4-week timeline. Silence again, but different. This wasn't just disagreement anymore. It was negotiation. How many do you need, he asked. Full team, she said immediately. Not happening. Then minimum 6. 4. 5, she said without hesitation. A beat. Mark considered it, calculating cost, efficiency, risk. 5, he agreed. Eliza didn't react outwardly, but internally, she marked it. A small win. Not emotional. Not symbolic. Functional. The meeting continued like that. Constant adjustments, collisions, small recalibrations. Nothing repeated. Nothing wasted. Every decision built on the last, each one tightening the structure around them. By the time they reached the final point, the air in the room had shifted. It wasn't just tension anymore. It was something more defined, a working dynamic forged under pressure rather than agreement. Final condition, Mark said. All external communication goes through me. No, Eliza said immediately. His expression didn't change, but something in his posture sharpened. That's not optional. It is if you expect authenticity, she replied. I am the brand. You don't speak for it. I control its positioning. You control its finances, she corrected. Not its voice. A pause. This one longer than the others. The analysts were completely still now, aware they were watching something more significant than a standard disagreement. If messaging is inconsistent, Mark said slowly, we lose credibility. If messaging is artificial, Eliza replied, we lose identity. Another silence. Then, unexpectedly, Mark nodded once. Joint approval, he said. Nothing public without alignment. Not control. Shared ground. Eliza accepted it with a single nod. The meeting ended without formality. No closing statements. The first sign wasn't obvious. It never was with someone like Julian, the director of operations who had expected to lead the Sterling liquidation himself before Mark sidelined him. She picked it up, glancing at the screen. Her expression didn't change immediately, but something in her posture did, subtle, but visible. What? Mark said. She didn't answer right away. She read the message fully, then once more, as if confirming it hadn't changed. Press inquiry, she said finally. That's not unusual. It is when they're asking about internal funding decisions, she replied. That shifted it. Mark's attention sharpened instantly. Show me. She handed him the phone without hesitation. The message was concise, but the implication wasn't. Request for comment regarding reports that Stone Capital is allocating client funds toward high-risk personal ventures tied to CEO Mark Stone. Silence. Not confusion. Not surprise. Recognition. Mark handed the phone back slowly. Who else has seen this? No one, Eliza said. It came directly to me. Not by accident, he said. Obviously. Another pause. But this one carried weight, direction, not just tension. Internal leak, Mark said. Or external manipulation, Eliza countered. Too specific, he replied. It's coming from inside. Her gaze held his for a second longer than usual. You already have someone in mind. Yes. Julian. He didn't confirm it directly. He didn't need to. Eliza exhaled slowly, processing fast. What's his angle? Positioning, Mark said. If he establishes misuse of funds, he doesn't just remove me. He discredits the entire decision chain behind this project. Which includes me, she said. Yes. Silence again, but sharper, more defined. This wasn't abstract conflict anymore. This was targeted. What do we do? She asked. Mark didn't answer immediately. He was already thinking ahead, mapping sequences, possible outcomes, points of exposure. We don't react publicly, he said finally. Not yet. So we let it spread. We let it develop, he corrected. Premature response validates uncertainty. Eliza crossed her arms slightly, not defensive, but contained. And in the meantime? In the meantime, we make sure there's nothing to validate, he said. She held his gaze, unwavering. There isn't. I know, he said. The certainty in his tone was immediate. Not calculated. Not strategic. Just clear. It caught her off guard. Not visibly, but internally. He trusted the numbers, not people. And yet, it's not just the press, Eliza added, her voice dropping. The pattern for the final piece, the midnight silk, it was altered. If I hadn't checked the grain this morning, the fabric would have shredded under the lights. It was a precision strike. Cutting the silk against the grain meant the structural integrity would hold for a fitting, but collapse under the heat and tension of a runway walk. It wasn't just a loss of money. It was a planned public execution of Eliza's technical reputation. Mark's jaw tightened. He's not just trying to bankrupt us anymore. He's trying to humiliate the work. He thinks I'll crumble under the technical failure, she said. Then we don't just finish, Mark replied, moving toward the door. We over-engineer it so there's no room for his shadow. You didn't even check, she said. I don't need to, he replied. Another pause. This one quieter, but heavier. Eliza looked away first, not retreating, just shifting focus back to the situation. Then he's building something out of nothing. No, Mark said. He's building something out of perception. That's more effective. She nodded once. That tracked. Her phone buzzed again. This time, she didn't need to check it. She already knew. It's spreading, she said. Yes. Silence. Then, he's been watching us, she added. Mark didn't react outwardly. But the shift was there, small, controlled, but real. Define watching. Meetings. Timing. The fact that press reached out to me first. She paused. And Paris. That one landed differently. Mark's gaze sharpened, not on her, but through the implication. Sequence. Pattern. Access. He doesn't have full data, Mark said slowly. Not yet. But he has enough, Eliza replied. Yes. Another silence. But this one wasn't static. It was moving, both of them adjusting, calculating, aligning without saying it directly. What's his next move? She asked. Escalation, Mark said. He won't stop at speculation. He'll push for formal review. With the board. Yes. And timing. Mark's answer came without hesitation. Before the final show. Of course. He wouldn't attack after outcome. He'd destabilize before it. Eliza exhaled once, slow and controlled. So we finish under pressure. We were always going to, Mark said. She didn't smile. She set the phone face down, the glass clicking against the table. Then we give him nothing, she said. We don't give him control, Mark corrected. A beat. Their eyes met again. But this time, it wasn't conflict. It wasn't negotiation. It was alignment under threat. Not trust. Not yet. But something close enough to function. Paris was supposed to be a clinical exercise in supply chain management. But the rain-slicked alleys of the garment district refused to cooperate. For 3 hours, Mark watched Eliza negotiate with a third-generation silk weaver who treated his fabric like a religious relic. She didn't use charm. She used technical ferocity, dissecting the denier count and tinsel strength until the weaver finally bowed in respect. Later, standing by a quiet stretch of the Seine, Mark looked at her sketches not as line items, but as a blueprint for something he couldn't quantify. The spreadsheets didn't account for the way the light hits this midnight silk, he admitted, his voice low against the sound of the river. It was his first surrender to the intangible, the moment the cold logic of the stone finally began to pulse with the fluid grace of her vision. The final show in New York was the battlefield. As the first model emerged under the sharp lights of the Sterling flagship, the atmosphere was thick with the residue of the morning's headlines. Mark stood in the shadows of the tech booth, his presence a silent redirection of the board's scrutiny, while Eliza commanded the floor. The collection was a physical manifestation of their war. The first look, a sharp-shouldered tuxedo jacket, carried Mark's obsession with geometry, but it was lined with a hidden, hand-painted silk that only the wearer would feel against their skin. It was power tempered by intimacy. As the models moved, the audience saw the impossible. Garments that looked as solid as stone but moved with the fluid grace of a heartbeat. Every piece was a counterargument to the claim of instability. The precision of the construction and the defiance of the design transformed the headlines into nothing more than static noise. By the time the final look, a fusion of structured midnight silk and fluid motion, reached the end of the runway, the shift in the room was absolute. The applause wasn't just for the clothes. It was a dismissal of the doubt Julian had sown. Julian's influence remained, but it no longer threatened the collection. The moment after the final applause was over, Eliza and Mark retreated to a small side office backstage. The room smelled of fabric, perfume, cleaning agents, and lingering tension. They didn't speak immediately. Both were absorbing the enormity of what had just occurred. Eliza finally broke the silence. "It's done," she said, voice low but certain. "Not entirely," Mark replied. His tablet lay open, graphs and reports still running. "Julian is exposed, yes, but the board hasn't seen all the evidence yet. He'll try to spin it." She leaned against the wall, eyes scanning the room but seeing nothing. "Then we give them proof. Everything he's done, the manipulations, the insider leaks, the financial misdeeds before the bankruptcy, all of it." Mark nodded, already opening a secure folder on his tablet. "I've compiled it. Statements, transaction logs, emails. Enough to leave no ambiguity." Eliza's hand hovered over the folder. "We submit it now?" "Yes," he said. "We do this together. No surprises. No hesitation." The walk to the boardroom felt like a march toward a verdict. Mark didn't lead. They walked as equals. Mark had spent the previous 4 hours on secure calls with the 3 largest institutional shareholders, laying out the preliminary findings of Julian's misconduct. He wasn't walking in hoping for a win. He was walking in to execute a prearranged coup. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of expensive cologne and cheap desperation. Julian sat at the head, a shark sensing blood in the water, already mid-sentence about fiduciary negligence. He didn't see the drive in Mark's hand or the cold steel in Eliza's gaze until it was too late. "The only negligence here," Mark interrupted, his voice cutting through the room like a blade, "is yours, Julian. And we have the digital trail to prove it." The atmosphere was cold, calculating. Board members whispered, casting glances at one another, already aware that the scandal had escalated far beyond casual rumors. Julian sat at the far end, smiling faintly, confident in his perceived upper hand. Eliza and Mark presented their case meticulously, each piece of evidence built upon the next. Transaction anomalies. Emails linking Julian to early attempts at undermining the brand. Misappropriation of funds. Every claim documented, verified, impeccable. Julian's smile faltered slightly as the chain of evidence unfolded. He tried to interject, deflect, shift blame, but the board was listening now to facts, not insinuation. By the end of the session, his influence had crumbled. The board voted unanimously for his immediate dismissal, with cause. He left under the weight of exposure, his ambitions thwarted, his credibility destroyed. Eliza exhaled, leaning back in her chair. "It's over." Mark's hand brushed hers subtly, not in business, but as acknowledgement of everything they had endured and achieved. "It is," he said. The brand was saved. Julian defeated. The collection, already celebrated, was now secure from internal sabotage. Outside the office, lights of New York shone bright as though reflecting the sense of triumph. Eliza and Mark stepped into the quiet night. Their partnership, both professional and personal, had solidified under pressure. "I never thought we'd make it," she admitted, voice quieter than the city around them. "We did," he said simply. They walked together through the streets, side by side, not needing to speak further. The risk had passed. The reward, both personal and for the legacy of the brand, was theirs. And in that quiet walk, they both understood that what had begun as a battle between control and compromise had evolved into something far more enduring. Trust forged in fire, strategic brilliance, and mutual respect. Months later, the atmosphere in the Sterling atelier had changed. They weren't out of the woods yet. The debt restructuring was a grueling, daily grind of legal filings and lean budgets. But the brand was no longer a dying star. It was a startup with a legacy. Mark had officially resigned from Stone Capital, trading his corporate exit package for a high-risk stake in the atelier's future. As they stood together in the sunlit studio, surrounded by new rolls of silk and the hum of sewing machines, the contract they had signed in the dark had evolved into something sturdier than paper. A partnership where the cold necessity of survival had finally met the uncompromising demand for beauty.